Hi, it's me again. And yes, I'm picking up where I left off last week. And this week we're going to talk about 5 ways to sabotage your career and what you might not want to do if you don't want to sabotage your career. So, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please hit that notifications button below. And, well, we'll be back. Just a little about me in case you don't know who I am. I am New York Times, Publishers Weekly, and USA Today bestselling author Yasmine Galenorn with a cattail fluttering in my face. And I have over 65 books out. I write paranormal romance, I write urban fantasy, and other things mixed in with it. A little bit of horror, a little bit of mystery, and so on. And I have 23 years business or experience in the business. 20 years I spent with traditional publishing, mostly New York publishers, and the last 3 I went indie, and I am loving it. Just entering my 4th year now. Hello, pretty girl. She loves her mama and she loves kisses. So we'll get started here with the topic at hand. So 5 ways to sabotage yourself. Yes, I love my pretty girl. And kissing kitties is not one of them, unless you have an allergy to cats, which thankfully I do not. I have allergies to everything else, it seems like, but not to kitties, and that makes me happy. So one of the first ways that I see authors sabotaging themselves is spreading themselves too thin. Now, I'm not talking about writing a lot of books a year, although for some authors that is spreading themselves too thin. I'm productive. I'm prolific. Productive too, but I'm prolific. I can write really fast, and I can write tight. And I love that indie gives me that option. However, no, don't do that. However, I see a lot of authors taking on side projects and trying to do too much, and they get scattered and they lose track of the writing itself. So that is a way that can be a real career killer. If you get so sidetracked by the business of writing rather than the writing itself and make poor business decisions, then it's going to impact your work. Last week I talked about watch how much you spread yourself thin on social media. Pick a few platforms, stick with them. That's one way. And another is, how many side projects are you taking on that aren't going to give you the return that you really want? For example, I've been invited a number of times to join anthologies, and there are a few I do because I have fun with them. But an anthology for me at this point doesn't give me the return I need on my time spent on the stories for it or the novellas for it. It doesn't pay back the time that would be better spent elsewhere. So you really need to look. I guess what I'm saying, you really need to look at where you're spending your time. Is it best spent on writing a story that has nothing to do with your series and isn't in the genre that you generally write? Or could that time be better spent writing a short story for your readers in a world that they love? Or could it be better spent putting that time into blogging or something? So weigh out where the best use of your time goes. How is this project going to impact your work in a positive manner? And if it does impact it in a positive manner, how much of a return do you get? And we're not talking just financial return. There are other types of returns. Bewitching Bedlam. When I was first going indie, well, the first year or so, I wrote a short story for an anthology that was out called Taming the Vampire, or that was being put out. And I wrote a short story called Blood Music. And I realized that could be made into a series. And it was a very good thing for me to do because A, it took me down a new path for some work, and B, at the time I really needed the exposure that anthologies provided, and it provided, I realized that I was going to be writing a series based on this short story. So I hustled to get the first book ready so that shortly after the anthology came out, I was able to put out the first book. But if it had been a short story that was totally off track, totally had nothing to do with my work or even my genre or something, it wouldn't have been a good use of my time to write that. It would have been, actually it could be counterproductive. If you say you write paranormal romance and you write a contemporary romance short story for an anthology, well, the people who like that are going to come to your work looking for more contemporary romance. And if they don't like paranormal romance, they're going to feel like, hey, there's nothing here for me. And that's fine. You know, it's like people like what they like. But if you happen to write paranormal romance, and maybe that short story has nothing to do with the series you write, but it's in the same genre, then they say, oh, well, I'll give this a try, give that a try. So don't spread yourself too thin. Make sure that the energy you're putting into your projects is worth putting into the projects at hand. Make sure that the projects are worth it for you. And I'm not at all saying that they're not worth doing for people. Just make sure that they're worth it for you, for your personal path. Because everybody's journey is different. So number 2, and I touched on this last week, don't get in author arguments. It looks bad. I mean, granted, you know, I'm going to get some flack on this, I'm pretty sure, because there are people who routinely get into arguments with other authors. And there have been famous feuds down through the years, but how much energy do you want to spend fighting with others? How much energy do you want to spend arguing with other authors? Really, especially in indie, the more we support each other, the better. Actually, that's true for traditional publishing too. These other authors are not there to be your enemy. Together we can make a much more vital force than separate. So I personally am of the camp who likes to work with other authors, who likes to promote other authors, who likes to interact with other authors in a positive manner, because it feels like it's the one place where I can talk about my work and be understood, because the writing mindset is a pretty wacky one. And 2, only another author is going to really understand what some of the pitfalls and what some of the heartaches are in this business. Even our families don't always understand. They can empathize with us, but they may not understand what we're going through. And it's really nice to have that support group of people who you feel have your back. So my personal opinion is avoid the arguments, avoid spending energy on wasting energy on useless debates. Number 3, writing to trend. Now this is an iffy one, because it can be a good thing if you like that trend and you tend to write in it anyway. Writing to trend usually means you have to do quick turnaround because trends come and go all the time. And this is especially true in traditional publishing. The minute you notice a trend in trad publishing, it's done. It's almost over. I got in on like the second wave of urban fantasy with Berkeley, and I was lucky that I didn't get in on the third wave because the third wave, most of the authors never made it past 2 books before they got cut off. I got in early enough to where I was able to establish myself. So if you are looking for what's selling, and that's all you're going to write is what's selling, you might want to rethink it because unless you love that, it can be just a grind. It can be a real grind. And you may not end up in there when the trend is still going, depending on how fast you can write. Now, I'm not saying never write to trend. If by all means, if you love, say, Witch Academy books right now are very popular. If you love, especially YA, Witch Academy books, it's a good time to write it. In fact, I stopped and I thought, I've got a potential series I could write in that. And I was like, no, A, I'm not a YA writer. I'm just not. And B, I have a plan set out for the next 2 or 3 years in my work that is for a steady build on what I've started. Don't destroy it. Don't sabotage myself. And I was like, Yasmine, spoke to myself and said, Yasmine, it's not worth chasing the trend. For one thing, you love what you're writing now. And another thing, if you start yet another series at this point, you're going to diffuse your readers. You're going to dilute your readers because they're going to get so tired of all the different potential things and waiting so long for everything. As it is, I've got too many series going right now, to make everybody happy. So I've chosen over the next 2 years, there are 3 series I'm going to focus on with an occasional foray into trying to finish up Fury. I've got 2 books left in that series I want to write, and finish up Bewitching Bedlam. But that's going to take a few years over, the next 2 to 3 years to work those into my plan. So be careful when you jump on the bandwagon because A, you may jump on the bandwagon only to find that most of the band's left, and B, you may not like the bandwagon when you get there, and C, if you have plans already made, if you've got things that are established, you can really muck up the works. Another way to sabotage yourself, and all this I say with a caveat, what I am telling you is not set in stone, and there's always going to be an exception. There always is. There's an exception for just about every rule. But these are generalized things that can really impact the work you're doing in a negative way if you don't think them out first. So the next tip, number 4, is jumping genre. Now, if the genres are close, you probably won't have a problem. But even in my work, okay, the Bewitching Bedlam readers don't tend to like the darker work as much, which is what I write for the most part. Bewitching Bedlam is very lighthearted paranormal romance, with hot vampire nookie in it, But most of my work is of a darker nature. It's just more serious. And I don't mean that in a serious as in a more important thing. It's just darker. It's less humorous. It's not as light of a romp. The people who are most vocal about Bewitching Bedlam, I love that they love the books, and I love writing the books, but they're not what sell. What sells is my work that's a little bit darker. What sells is the work that's more urban fantasy than paranormal romance. The Wild Hunt, is going huge, and I'm thrilled with it because I love writing it. Um, Now Fury, my Fury and Bound series. Post-apocalyptic, eco-cyberpunk urban fantasy. Uh, and I love that I can write this because I'm in indie. You can write what you want. It sells sort of between Bewitching Bedlam and The Wild Hunt. Um, it's a bit too dark for some of my readers, and it's not as urban fantasy as some of my readers want, and it's a bit too convoluted for other readers. So even though my genres that I tend to write in are very close, the readers may not jump ship to go with the other series. Some of my readers do. Some of my readers will read anything that I put my name on. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But I understand because, there are authors I really like, but I don't like all of their series. I read one of their series or two instead of all of them. Or I read some of their standalones when they've got a paranormal bent, but the ones that don't, I don't read. I understand perfectly how this happens. And because I understand it, I understand how my readers may not like everything I'm writing. So if you keep jumping genres, you're going to confuse your readers, and some of them may feel cheated, and some, when you get to writing several series, if you can only write a certain amount of books per year, if you have to take a year off from a series, those readers may drift away. Now, I'm fully aware that some of my Bewitching Bedlam readers may drift away because they're not getting as many Maddie books as they like. And some of my Fury readers may be upset because they're not getting as many Fury books. But yeah, there's only so much time, and especially with indie, you have to keep things on an even keel. Leading to number 5, taking too long between books. This is another tricky tip. If you can write prolifically and tight, you're lucky if you're an indie writer. I felt stymied when I was with Berkeley because I wasn't allowed to write more than 3 books a year. They only wanted 3 books a year. They kept telling me, you'll dilute your fan base. Well, no, that hasn't happened. I haven't diluted my fan base by writing more. In fact, a lot of my fans are very thrilled with that. But if I only write 1 book a year, there are, in indie especially, trad, it's a little different, although readers get frustrated there too. And they may forget you. If you don't write more than 1 book a year, sorry, unless you are one of their mega favorites, they're probably going to forget that you've got a book coming out if you take 2 years, if you take a year and a half to write the next book. I'm not saying you can't just write a couple books a year and make it an indie, because you can. I know people who do. But you have to build up that reader base, and you have to hope that they understand. And I think it depends on the genre too. Urban fantasy tends to be a more quick turnaround genre. Readers like seeing books come out more often. Whereas for others, other genres, maybe 2 books a year are fine. But if you take too long and you space out your books way too far apart, you are probably going to see a drop off in readership. And you can't blame people for that because there are so many authors out there and all readers, they read more than one author. Let's face it, our readers read lots of authors. I love it when I hear that I'm somebody's favorite author because I know they probably read a ton of books. And that's special. That means something to me. Because, it's like, oh wow, I don't expect that they only read my books. I know they read, other authors. I know they read other Nalini Singh and Janine Frost, and they read Carrie Stevens, and they read Deborah Dunbar, and they read Danica Dark, and they read so many other authors that half the time they can't remember the name of the author. And to know that, it's like to hear someone go, "You're my favorite author," and know that they probably read a fuck ton of books makes me really happy. It makes me feel honored. And that being said, it also makes me aware of they're reading all these other books. And honestly, if I want writing to be a career, I need to write several books a year. I'm lucky I can. I'm lucky I can write as fast as I do. And that I enjoy writing, and that I get a little antsy when I take too much downtime. I don't do vacations well. But yeah, and unless you can write quickly in indie, you need to caretake your readers and keep them abreast of what's going on. I suppose that's my best advice, is if you have a lull where you have to keep, you have to take a break, or you really need to take some downtime so you don't burn out, let your readers know what's going on. Don't just go into radio silence, because if you do that, they may assume that you have stopped writing. So there, 5 things to avoid self-sabotage in your career. A lot to think about, but hey, it's a career. It's not just a hobby for some of us, and so yeah, there will be a lot to think about. And I will see you next week when I discuss ways to organize your writing day.